But now let's turn to Kevin Rudd. We can tonight exclusively reveal freshly unearthed footage of Kevin Rudd calling Donald Trump a village idiot. Now, Rudd is already dealing with headlines in the New York Times, no less, about why he deleted his tweets calling Trump a traitor. But now there are further damaging comments that he's made in the past about Donald Trump. Have a look.
In the last 4 years has been run by a village idiot, competent in its national statecraft, and the United States increasingly incompetent in its national statecraft under Trump.
And those two comments were edited together. So he called him a village idiot, and then he said that the United States under Trump was incompetent. He also was caught on film mocking Trump.
I stand by what I wrote then. That was in a pre-Trump world. I hope to publish again soon, hopefully early next year, the future of US-China relations under President Trump. And then the subtitle will be a call for a new tremendous piece of very big, beautiful Mar-a-Lago chocolate cake. That's the working title. Any other suggestions I'd greatly receive.
You wouldn't hear Kevin Rudd speaking about any other United States president like that. In other comments, he also claimed that Trump was in love with dictators. Have a look.
But the underpinnings of it were still incoherent because Trump himself was incoherent. And he waxed and waned from being in love with dictators to not knowing what he wanted from dictators.
Now, Rudd's poor judgment in making those comments in the first place is only matched by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's poor judgment in appointing Rudd in the first place. Rudd failed to recognise that the MAGA movement wasn't going away and that Trump could be president once again, while Albanese knew full well that Rudd had trashed the former president, but appointed him anyway to our most important ambassadorship, our man in Washington. Now, businesses across Australia right now will be rightly worrying about whether we're going to be hit with the 10% tariffs that Trump plans to impose on countries around the world. And they'd be even more worried because is Rudd really the best person to make the case that Australia should be exempt when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump? Now, as the nightly editor, Chris Dorr, writes, loose-lipped Rudd is so arrogant he actually thinks he can walk back every insult ever delivered about Trump and get away with it. Well, he can't. No one's going to forget. And the widespread media coverage now that he's deleting his comments is only amplifying the devastating remarks he made. They're now being repeated in the media over and over again. Well, to discuss, let's bring in Sky News host Steve Price and contributor Joe Hilderbrand.
Good evening.
Welcome to you both. Steve, Chris Dorr also made the very good point in his article that probably Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong actually agree with everything Kevin Rudd said about Trump in the past.
Well, they probably do. I mean, nothing surprises me about Kevin. I mean, he called me a gutless coward, which is clearly defamatory, and he wanted it published in an open letter in the News Limited papers around the country. So it's all going to come back to haunt him. And people will find more and more examples, as you have brilliantly done, of things he said in the past. Now, Donald Trump, I think we know one thing about him. He's a relationship guy. I mean, Joe Hockey went and played golf with him, deliberately lost, and we managed to keep tariffs off things like steel and aluminium. I mean, Kevin Rudd's not going to get that sort of treatment. The own goal by Anthony Albanese in appointing Kevin Rudd was probably as bad as Tony Abbott and the knighthood for Prince Philip. I mean, it's worse than that because this is economically going to be very difficult for Australia. Much worse.
Exactly. You know, our national security, our trade, the US is important for so many reasons. But Joe Hilderbrand, these new comments that we've just played tonight, calling Trump a village idiot. I mean, that's a new level of low from Rudd.
Yeah, it's interesting. Donald Trump, or the election of Donald Trump, is actually schooling a whole bunch of the sort of shall we say, the narcissistic, smug left in ways that I think are incredibly illuminating and incredibly helpful to those of us who would like to see them taught a lesson and put back in their box. Now, it has to be remembered that when Kevin Rudd was made ambassador to the US, part of the reason for that was to get him off Twitter, was to get him to shut up, stop calling for a royal commission into News Corp, stop slagging off everybody he didn't like, settling old scores. And I can promise you that was very much part of the thinking in booting him over there. He would have to be, quite literally, diplomatic. The fact that he didn't scrub those tweets at the time, I think, speaks to a level of perhaps arrogance and complacency. I don't think Trump had even announced his renomination at the time that these comments were made. And that goes to another piece of I suppose, you know, elite lefty arrogance. And this is goes back to the first thing I wrote after Biden was elected, which was all these people celebrating as though it was all over, it was never going to come back again. I'm like, you think those 70 million plus voters, the second highest turnout for anyone in US presidential history, they're just going to go away now? Yeah. Like that's it, that's all, they're beaten. And you had all these lefties in Australia and in America, these urban, elite, upper middle class, tertiary educated, smartest people in the room, and this is another thing that it's exposed. Oh, we're so much smarter than you, you're just an idiot. Oh, he's gone forever, everything's fine. And they clearly had never actually contemplated the fact that this guy could come back and be their worst nightmare. They'd clearly never seen the sequel to an action film.
He was never going away. But just before we move on from Rudd, one of the most egregious things as well is that he actually took a media outlet to the press council because he was so outraged about the reports that he was going to be or was being considered for the job of the next ambassador in Washington. And it was all true. It was all true. Unbelievable. Now, let's have a look at the news poll today. The coalition has received, Peter Dutton, a major boost because the primary for the coalition has now lifted to 40%. Peter Dutton is also closing in on Anthony Albanese in the Better Prime Minister poll, jumping 4 points. Now, Steve, the coalition needs a primary of at least 40%, probably 41% to be in a winning position. But it looks like, judging by the momentum over the past year, Peter Dutton is slowly inching there.
Slow and steady, and the point about it is that he's now in a position where he can say in an election campaign to every Australian, do you feel better off now than you did 3 years ago, which is the line that Donald Trump used to get elected in the United States. And of course the answer to that question is no. And so you've got now Peter Dutton in a position where he's competitive. I mean, I don't think anybody, the coalition included, and Peter Dutton particularly, are getting ahead of themselves. They know there's got a hell of a lot of work still to do. But Peter Dutton now has the perfect opportunity. You've got to fight this election on policies, not on past records. So he's going to fight it on cost of living, immigration in particular. That's the other issue that people are really upset about. And, of course, energy policy with nuclear thrown into the mix. So I think Anthony Albanese, after a horror couple of weeks where he's had, you know, the upgrade drama and the holiday house, he would have woken up this morning, picked up his copy of The Australian and thought, oh, God, I've really got a problem now.
You see, that's what I'm not sure about, because even when we could all tell that The Voice was going to be defeated, Joe, Albo was still, even privately to you, insisting that he was going to win. I don't know if I've ever... But surely at this point, you know, Albanese once boasted he'd never lost a news poll, but even surely he must be getting worried now.
I would certainly never reveal any private conversations I haven't had, but certainly I can say the one thing that troubles me most about Albo is his confidence, and that even when, and you need that to be a politician because you need that elven.
I'm not saying you did, but you were on this show. You were on this show saying Albanese says he's going to win.
But he is very confident. He's very confident, and he's often, in my view, too confident. And obviously that confidence was misplaced in The Voice, and that was something I was saying publicly, that this is, you know,
delusional would be a word I use.
We need to fix it. Yeah, that's right. And again, I think this is a useful wake-up call. I mean, there was a school of thought among sections of the Labor Party that the great strategy would be to demonise Peter Dutton and make him Australia's Donald Trump. Well, that doesn't look too bright now, does it? Because in that scenario, Peter Dutton wins in a landslide. And I think also it is a reminder, and Albo and the government have been very good about this. Since the Voice really burnt their fingers, they have been concentrating wholly on bread and butter issues, wholly on cost of living matters. They have not been distracted by any other, you know, quote unquote, sort of woke or ideological agendas when there were issues around, you know, naming people's gender or
Are you
sexuality.
talking about Dutton here or the government?
The government,
The government hasn't been focused on cost of living at all.
It has. It's giving tax cuts to everybody. It's supporting wage increases.
Let's have a look at Nancy Pelosi.
Childcare, free TAFE. But point being, they have learned their lessons. There are a lot of lessons to learn, and if they just stick to the centre, they'll be all right. And this hasn't been. Obviously, Labor is going to get bad polls.
You get it, Joe, but the government has not learned its lesson. There's
sure
no
they will
question.
Take my counsel with my time.
Right. Now, Nancy Pelosi has blamed the loss at the election on President Joe Biden. Have a look.
Had the president gotten out sooner, there may have been other candidates in the race. Kamala, I think, still would have won, but she may have been stronger, having taken her case to the public sooner. The anticipation was that if the president were to step aside, that there would be an open primary.
Steve Price, it is true that if Biden would have stepped aside earlier, a proper primary process could have been run, a stronger candidate would have been found. It probably wouldn't have been Kamala Harris.
You get a proper primary, you get a proper candidate, which wasn't Kamala Harris. But Nancy Pelosi, I mean, who needs her as a friend? I mean, poor old Joe Biden. I mean, we all felt sorry for Joe Biden for years as he stumbled up the stairs of the aircraft and couldn't remember his name. But Pelosi was sitting there that whole time and they let him hang there on the branch and finally they had to cut him down. But to now come out and say that, I mean, I feel sorry for Joe Biden, to be honest. I mean, that is a disgraceful behaviour by someone who has, worked off the back of Joe Biden for years.
Look, he should have stepped aside earlier. He was thrown out ultimately by Barack Obama and by Nancy Pelosi. But also this loss has exposed all the infighting with the different camps, Joe.
I have no sympathy for Joe Biden whatsoever. It was outrageous to think that he would run again, given his age and obvious cognitive decline. I don't think anyone expected that would happen except for Joe Biden, and perhaps Jill Biden has a lot to answer for because she seems to be the one who was sort of juicing him up and giving him his talking points and giving him a little pat on the back like a toddler when he actually got something right. I thought it was the most embarrassing spectacle I've ever seen. And the idea that you would torch the entire Democratic Party's chances, maybe for a generation, bring back Donald Trump, who, by your own reckoning, is the most dangerous president in US history. I don't believe that, but that's what they say. And they were prepared to actually roll the dice on that and bring it back with a candidate they knew couldn't beat anyone else. So they maybe let Donald, lured Donald back into the nomination, or otherwise fail to find a better candidate who could have beaten Donald Trump or someone else. And they did all of that, by their own admission, brought the most dangerous man in the United States back into the White House just for the sake of one man's vanity, one man's personal legacy project. Torch the entire party for that, torch the entire country for that. And they say Trump is the one with dictatorial, anti-democratic tendencies. Give me a break.
The reality is neither Joe Biden nor Kamala Harris would have been able to win against Donald Trump. And the reason the Obamas, in my view, took so long to come out and endorse Kamala Harris was not because they wanted another candidate. They probably wanted Michelle Obama to run it. And you can see that by the books. Right. I mean, reading between the lines. And I did read, by the way, her most recent book.
She didn't want to run, but they wanted her to.
I strongly believe that she does want a political career, just judging by reading her book. Anyway, time will tell. Joe Hilderbrand, Steve Price, thank you both so much.